Fable 5 cost 3 times more per token than Kimi K3, and that gap holds on both input and output pricing. Same context window, same coding ballpark. So I wanted to figure out what you're actually paying for. Both models dropped recently, and people are picking sides fast. So I ran Kimi K3 against Fable 5 across 4 real tests: multimodal support, context window, pricing, and coding accuracy. And every number I'm using is pulled from official docs and community benchmarks. No vendor spin. And honestly, the thing that surprised me most wasn't the price cap at all. It was one specific capability that could completely change which model you pick depending on what your workflow looks like. And it has nothing to do with benchmarks. So this comparison is really for developers and teams who are billing by the token or building pipelines that need to process more than just text. Because if you're on the wrong model, you're either overpaying by 3 times or you're missing native video and audio support entirely. And both of those are real costs, not theoretical ones. Test 1 is multimodal input support. And if you pick the wrong model here, you're rebuilding your whole pipeline around a workaround. Because you send a video file, the model can't read it, and now you're transcribing manually or swapping models mid-project. Both handle text and images, that's a tie, but Kimi K3 also takes video and audio straight in with no pre-processing needed. And Fable 5 doesn't do either of those, though Fable does counter with file uploads like PDFs, which Kimi K3 doesn't list support for, so it's not a clean sweep. Now, if your workflow is document heavy and you're ingesting PDFs all day, Fable 5's file upload support is actually pretty useful, and Kimi K3 doesn't cover that. So the gap here is real, but it cuts both ways depending on what you're actually feeding into the model. Kimi K3 takes test 1, and I was expecting both models to be pretty close here, but native video and audio in Kimi K3 with nothing comparable on the Fable 5 side is a bigger gap than I thought. So Kimi 1, Fable 0. All right, test 2 is context window. And if you've ever had a model, just forget what you told it 50,000 tokens ago, you know how painful that is. Because your mid-code base review, the model loses the thread, and now you're chunking things manually and stitching outputs together. I pulled the official docs and API provider pages for both, and Kimi K3 comes in at 1 million tokens, Fable 5 also at 1 million tokens, so there's no difference here at all. Both can hold an entire book or a massive code base in context without dropping anything. That said, having a 1 million token window and actually using it well are two different things. And I didn't run head-to-head tests on context recall quality, so the number is the same, but real-world performance inside that window could still vary. This one's a dead tie, and honestly, I was expecting one of them to have an edge, maybe a bigger window or a longer output limit, but both sit at exactly 1 million tokens, so the score stays at Kimi 1, Fable 0, with 1 tie on the board. Okay, test 3 is pricing, and this one actually hurts if you get it wrong, because run a high-volume pipeline on the more expensive model for a month, and you might not notice until the invoice lands. And at scale, a 3x cost difference turns into a real budget conversation with your team. When I pulled the pricing pages, Kimi K3 is $3 per million input tokens and $15 per million output. Fable 5 is $10 input and $50 output. So that's 3.3 times cheaper on both sides for Kimi. And Kimi also has a cached input tier at 30 cents per million, which Fable 5 doesn't publish anything comparable for. Kimi K3 wins pricing. And it's not close because I was expecting maybe a 50% difference, something you could rationalize away with quality arguments. But 3.3 times cheaper is hard to ignore. So that puts Kimi at 2 wins, Fable at 0, with 1 tie still on the board. Now, test 4 is coding and reasoning accuracy. And if you pick the weaker model here, you're not just getting slower output, you're getting bugs that slip through, logic errors you have to catch yourself, and extra review cycles that eat up your time, which for any agentic coding workflow really matters. Kimi K3 posts scores across 5 different coding tests. Deep SWE at 67.5, Program Bench at 77.8, Terminal Bench 2.1 at 88.3, Frontier SWE at 81.2, and SWE Marathon at 42. While Fable 5 has SWE Bench Pro at 80.3%. And the honest caveat is these are completely different benchmarks, so a direct comparison isn't really possible. And this is where I want to take it with a grain of salt, because Kimi's numbers come from Moonshot's own reported tests, and Fable 5's SWE Bench Pro score is community reported. Neither set ran on the same setup. So you're kind of pulling a lever on a slot machine if you try to rank these against each other directly. This one's another tie. And I was honestly expecting a clearer answer here, but without a shared benchmark, I can't hand either one the win. So the final score is Kimi K3 2, Fable 5-0, 2 ties, and both models show up on coding, just on different tests. Kimi K3 wins on 3 things: native video and audio input that Fable 5 just doesn't have, pricing at $15 per million output tokens versus $50 for Fable, which is 3.3 times cheaper, and a cached input tier at 30 cents per million that makes repeated prompts way more affordable at scale. Fable 5 wins on file handling since it can ingest PDFs and documents directly, and Kimi K3 doesn't list that support. Also has an 80.3% score on SubWeBench Pro, which is a widely used coding benchmark. And Anthropic's safety and reliability track record matters if you're deploying in an enterprise setting. Honestly, I went in expecting Fable 5 to justify its price with some clear performance edge, and I didn't find one. So here's how I'd call it. If you need video and audio input and want to keep costs down, pick Kimi K3, $15 per million output tokens. That's your number. But if your workflow is document heavy or you need Anthropic's safety guarantees for enterprise, Fable 5 is worth the premium.